I've always been a man who plays by the rules. At 52, I've paid my dues decades in corporate finance, a tidy nest egg, and a quiet life in a suburban neighborhood I thought would be my sanctuary. When I bought my home in the pristine Oakwood Meadows, a so-called upscale community with a homeowners association, I imagined lazy weekends tinkering with my classic Mustang or sipping coffee on a porch overlooking manicured lawns. What I didn't expect was a petty tyrant named Susan, the HOA president, who'd turn my two cars into a neighborhood scandal. And I certainly didn't foresee myself buying the entire neighborhood's land just to shut her down. But sometimes, life pushes you to make a point, and I made mine. It all started with my cars. I own two, a reliable Honda for daily commutes and a 1967 Mustang I've been restoring for years. Both were parked neatly in my driveway, or, when I was working on the Mustang, tucked in my garage. Never on the street. Never an eyesore unless you think a covered classic car is a crime, which Susan apparently did. The first HOA notice arrived, a prim little letter citing some vague rule about vehicle aesthetics and community standards. It hinted that my project vehicle was unbecoming, even though it was mostly under a tarp waiting for a carburetor. I laughed, secured the cover, and figured it was just HOA nonsense. I was wrong. A week later, another notice landed, this one threatening fines for excessive vehicles. Two cars for a single guy didn't seem excessive, especially when Susan, who lived in a gaudy mansion 4 houses down, had 3 vehicles in her driveway. A shiny Lexus SUV with vanity plates reading Susan 1, her husband's loud Corvette, and a Mercedes that seemed reserved for her yappy Shih Tzu. The hypocrisy was glaring. I decided to talk to her, catching her during one of her patrols in her Lexus, peering over sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. "Susan," I said politely, "I've got 2 cars, both parked properly. Your notices seem a bit selective." I nodded toward her driveway. "You've got 3 vehicles yourself." Her eyes narrowed, and she spoke like I was a child. "My vehicles are appropriate for Oakwood Meadows' image. Yours are not. The rules, Mr. Thompson, are for those who need them." I pointed out the bylaws, which I'd read and found Vigano hard limit on vehicles, just a note about operational, non-commercial use. She rolled up her window and drove off. A $100 fine arrived days later for excessive vehicle count and unapproved type. I paid it to avoid trouble, but the injustice burned. I'm patient, but I don't tolerate bullies. My career taught me how to read contracts, assess value, and outmaneuver opponents. Susan, with her fake smile and overpriced perfume, was about to learn she'd picked the wrong fight. The fines kept coming. $100 for my cars, $50 for grass a quarter-inch too long, $75 for putting trash bins out at 7 p.m. instead of the sacred 6 a.m. pickup time. Each came with Susan's handwritten notes, dripping with condescension about community responsibility. I documented everything, every fine, every photo of Susan's own violations, like her overflowing trash cans or Christmas lights up until March. I even snapped time-stamped pictures of my lawn post-landscaping to preempt her next complaint. I attended an HOA meeting in the community clubhouse, a stuffy room reeking of stale coffee and Susan's perfume. Susan sat at the head, flanked by 2 board members I dubbed Bobblehead and Blankface. Bobblehead nodded at her every word. Blankface just looked confused. When I raised the issue of selective enforcement, Susan cut me off. "Mr. Thompson, the board's decision is final. We have bigger concerns." Bobblehead nodded. Blankface shrugged. The room was silent, residents too scared or apathetic to speak. I wasn't done. I called an old colleague, a lawyer named Tom, who'd handled HOA disputes. I showed him my evidence, fines, photos, bylaws. "Classic HOA overreach," he said, whistling. "You can fight each fine, but it'll drag on." Or he grinned. "Look at the bigger picture." He suggested digging into the HOA's governing documents and land records. "You might find leverage." That word leverage lit a fire. I spent weeks at the county records office, poring over deeds and plat maps. Then I found it. Oakwood Meadows wasn't standard. Homeowners owned their houses, but the land was under a 99-year master lease held by Oakwood Properties LLC, a shell company managed by an out-of-state trust. The HOA was just a contractor managing the community for the real landowner. Susan's power was a mirage. The idea hit me. What if I became the landlord? It was crazy buying a neighborhood's land to squash an HOA dictator. But my finance brain saw opportunity. The land lease was undervalued. The neighborhood was prime real estate. I hired a private investigator, a pro named Carla, to track down the trust's manager, a golf-obsessed suit named Mr. Daniels. He barely cared about Oakwood Properties, which was just a line item in his portfolio. Perfect. I got a copy of a lease agreement from a neighbor, Mrs. Larson, who'd clashed with Susan over her garden flamingos. The lease confirmed the HOA's role as a middleman, collecting ground rent for Oakwood Properties. I set up an anonymous LLC, Green Haven Investments, to pursue the purchase. Tom made the first call to Daniels, posing as counsel for an investment group interested in land leases. We played it cool, never mentioning Oakwood specifically at first. After weeks of talks, Daniels bit. The due diligence was grueling, reviewing leases, financials, and the HOA contract. The HOA's management agreement was weak, with clauses letting the landowner terminate it for cause or not renew it in 2 years. Better yet, the landowner could appoint HOA board members if mismanagement was proven. Susan's reign was on borrowed time. Meanwhile, I started buying houses through another LLC, Community Growth Partners. I targeted unhappy residents or those selling naturally, like Mrs. Larson, who took my above-market offer and moved to an HOA-free condo. "Give Susan what's coming," she said, grinning. I bought 7 houses, each a silent jab at Susan's empire. She was too busy finding people for mailbox colors or excessive bird feeders to notice. Negotiations for Oakwood Properties took 6 months. Offers, counteroffers, endless paperwork. Tom's calm demeanor kept Daniels engaged while I crunched numbers. The final price was steep but fair, with upside potential from adjusting ground rents later. The day we signed the purchase agreement, I felt a cold thrill. The closing was routine signatures, wire transfers. Green Haven Investments now owned the land under Oakwood Meadows. Every homeowner, including Susan, was my tenant. I waited weeks, ensuring all legalities were airtight. Susan kept up her nonsense, fining me for improperly pruned shrubs. I nearly framed that one. The next HOA meeting was my stage. I had Tom draft a letter to the HOA board, announcing Green Haven's ownership and my appointment as its board representative. It arrived the day before the meeting, registered mail. I pictured Susan's confusion as she signed for it. I walked into the meeting late, on purpose. Susan was mid-lecture about holiday light rules. She frowned as I entered. "Mr. Thompson, you're late." I smiled. "Susan, open your mail. It's urgent." The room watched as she tore open the envelope. Her face went white, her hands shaking as she read. This can't be right," she stammered. I stepped forward. "It's simple, Susan. My company owns the land under every house here. I'm now on this board. And with 7 properties I own outright, I'm the majority stakeholder. We can talk lights or the HOA's future. Your call." The silence was electric. Susan sputtered. "You can't buy a neighborhood." I shrugged. "I did. Green Haven owns the land, and Community Growth Partners owns 7 houses, soon 8. That's a lot of votes." Bobblehead muttered. "Unbelievable." Blank Face, shockingly, spoke. "Explains the house sales." Susan glared, but the room was shifting. Residents murmured, some hopeful, others stunned. I called for a no-confidence vote in Susan as president and Bobblehead as treasurer, who'd rubber-stamped her every whim. With my votes and a few bold residents, it passed. Susan shrieked, "I'll sue." I nodded to Tom, who'd slipped in. "My lawyer's ready," I said. Then came the evictions, not mass chaos, but targeted. Susan and her 2 closest allies, including Bobblehead, had violated lease clauses about community harmony through selective enforcement. I sent non-renewal notices for their land leases, offering to buy their houses at market value. They could accept or try moving their homes, an expensive nightmare. Most residents stayed. I wanted reform, not upheaval. I announced a new, fair HOA board and a bylaw overhaul. No more fines for grass height or trash times. Susan refused my offer for her mansion, threatening lawsuits. Tom dismantled her lawyer's arguments. The law was clear. She owned the house, I owned the land. Bobblehead took my offer and left quietly, almost relieved. Blank Face, who'd shown some guts, kept her lease and later ran for the new board. Susan's cronies grumbled, but sold. Months later, Susan caved, selling her house for less than my first offer. her legal fees eating her profits. The day her Lexus rolled out, neighbors breathed easier. I didn't watch her go I'd won. We rebuilt the HOA, slashing fees and silly rules. The neighborhood felt alive again, neighbors chatting without fear. I sold my 7 houses to new families, transparent about the land lease. 2 years later, I sold Greenhaven to a solid property firm, pocketing a hefty profit. My 2 cars. They sit proudly in my driveway, no fines in sight. Susan's tyranny sparked a wild ride buying a neighborhood, ousting a bully, and turning a profit. Sometimes, the little guy with a plan can topple a giant. What do you think? Have you faced petty tyrants or injustice in your life? Share your stories in the comments. Let's debate power, fairness, and fighting back. Your voice matters.